The slap exploded across his face like a gunshot at 30,000 feet. Rebecca Walsh, her teeth bared. Her hand, still raised and trembling with white-knuckled fury, had just struck a black passenger across the cheek so hard that his glasses flew sideways, and blood beaded on his lip. "You people disgust me!" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom saliva flying from her mouth. The cabin froze. 200 witnesses, a dozen phones recording, and James Wilson, blood on his mouth, slowly turned his head back toward her, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a badge that was about to destroy her entire life. Before we go further, please hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end, because what happens next will shock you. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story has traveled across the world. Now let's go back to the beginning. The boarding process at Gate 47 had already been running 40 minutes behind schedule. James Wilson shuffled forward in the jet bridge, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder, his federal credentials tucked discreetly into an inside pocket where no one would ever think to look. He had been traveling for nearly 20 hours. Qatar to Frankfurt, Frankfurt to Atlanta, and now Atlanta to Seattle, where his daughter Maya was turning 8 tomorrow morning, and where his wife Denise was waiting with a homemade chocolate cake and a patience that was wearing thinner by the hour. He had promised Maya he would be there. He had promised. James was 43 years old, built like a man who had spent 15 years in the United States Air Force before transitioning to the Federal Air Marshal Service. His shoulders were broad, his posture still carried the echo of military discipline, and his eyes dark and observant, never stopped moving. Not because he was paranoid, because he was trained. Because in his line of work, the difference between a good day and a catastrophic one was often measured in the tiny details most people never noticed. The man fidgeting with his watch. The woman who boarded with no luggage. The flight attendant whose smile didn't quite reach her eyes. And today, James had noticed that flight attendant the moment he stepped into the cabin. "Welcome aboard," Rebecca Walsh said to the passenger in front of him, her voice syrup-sweet but brittle, like sugar glass about to shatter. "Row 22 is on your left, sir." Then she looked up at James, and her smile vanished. It was such a small thing. Anyone else would have missed it. But James had spent half his life reading faces in airports, in marketplaces, in border checkpoints where a wrong guess could get someone killed. And the look Rebecca gave him wasn't tired. It wasn't distracted. It was something colder. A flicker of judgment. A fraction of a second where her eyes moved from his face, down to his wrinkled sweater, down to his scuffed boots, and back up again. And in that instant, she had decided something about him. James said nothing. He nodded politely and moved on. "Seat 18C, she said flatly, not meeting his eyes again. "Aisle." "Thank you, ma'am." He made his way down the narrow corridor, ducking slightly beneath the overhead bins, apologizing as he squeezed past an elderly woman struggling with her compression stockings. He slid into his seat and exhaled a long, slow breath he felt like he had been holding for a week. The window seat next to him was empty. The middle seat, too. A small mercy after a long journey. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to Denise. "Just boarded. Should land by 7. Tell Maya I'm on my way home." 3 little dots appeared. Then her reply. "She hasn't stopped asking about you. Fly safe. I love you." James smiled a rare and quiet smile and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He closed his eyes for just a moment. Just a moment to breathe. Just a moment to pretend he was already home. That moment didn't last long. "Sir, you cannot put that bag there. Did you not hear what I said?" Rebecca's voice sliced through the cabin like a whip. James's eyes opened. 3 rows ahead of him, a young couple was standing in the aisle. The husband, no older than 25, wore a look of exhausted helplessness. His wife cradled a baby girl against her chest, perhaps 5 or 6 months old, wrapped in a pale pink blanket. And on the seat beside them sat a small gray diaper bag. Nothing remarkable, nothing oversized. The kind of bag any parent traveling with an infant would carry. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, I was just trying to get her settled first. The bin above our row is already full and I was going to—" "I told you." Rebecca snapped, her voice rising sharp enough that 3 rows in every direction turned to look, "that all carry-ons must fit either under the seat in front of you or in an overhead bin. That is not a pillow. That is a bag. Put it up or check it." "I can't check it," the young mother said quietly, her voice trembling. "It has her formula, her medicine. I need it with us." That is not my problem, ma'am. James sat up straighter in his seat. He had seen this before. The overtired flight attendant stretched too thin by too many back-to-back flights, taking it out on the easiest target. It happened. But what he was watching now was not just exhaustion. There was something meaner underneath it. Something personal. Something that made Rebecca's voice curl with contempt every time she said the word, ma'am. The young husband tried again. Please, if I could just have one more minute too. You've had plenty of minutes. We're holding up boarding. You either get that bag stowed right now, or I'm going to have to ask you to step off the aircraft. The baby started to cry, a soft, thin, exhausted wail, the kind of cry that said she was hungry and tired, and that her whole little world was shaking. Her mother bounced her gently, whispering, shh, shh, shh. But the tears kept coming, and now the mother's tears were coming too, and the young husband's hands were shaking as he fumbled with the bag. James unbuckled his seatbelt. He didn't think about it. He didn't weigh the pros and cons. He just stood up. Excuse me, he said, his voice low and calm. The voice he used in crisis negotiations and hostage protocols. The voice that had pulled panicked civilians off burning transport planes in Kandahar. Let me give you a hand. Rebecca's head whipped around. Sir, return to your seat. This does not concern you. I think it does, ma'am. I've got plenty of room in my overhead bin. I'll just shift my duffel over and make space for theirs. It's no trouble. Sir, I said return to your seat. James didn't stop. He walked calmly to the overhead bin above row 15, opened it, and began rearranging the bags inside. There was plenty of space. There had always been plenty of space. He shifted his own duffel to the side, slid a briefcase backward, and opened up easily a full foot of unused room. There we go, he said gently to the young mother, gesturing toward the bin. Hand me the bag, sweetheart. We'll get you settled in no time. The young woman looked at him with eyes brimming over. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. No need to thank me. You just take care of that beautiful girl. He lifted the diaper bag, fitted easily into the bin, and gently closed the hatch. The baby's crying had softened to a hiccup. The young husband was whispering something to his wife, and the whole cabin seemed to exhale at once, the invisible cord of tension loosening just enough for everyone to remember they were still human. Everyone, that is, except Rebecca Walsh. She stood at the front of the aisle, her face the color of raw meat. Her jaw clenched so hard, James could see the muscle twitching in her cheek. Her hands were balled into fists at her sides, and when she spoke, her voice was a low, venomous hiss. You undermined me. James turned, calmly, patiently. Ma'am, I didn't mean to undermine anyone. I just saw a family in distress and I said you undermined me. In front of my entire cabin, in front of my passengers. With respect, ma'am, they're all our passengers. And that young mother was struggling. I just wanted to help. You don't work here. You don't wear this uniform. And you do not get to override my instructions on my aircraft. James took a slow, careful breath. He could have said it then. He could have reached into his pocket, flashed his federal credentials, identified himself as an air marshal, and ended the entire conversation. Because the law is very clear on this point. Any passenger at all, can assist other passengers in a non-critical situation. And a federal air marshal certainly does not need permission from a flight attendant to stand up from his seat. But James Wilson had spent his whole career learning one lesson above all others. In a confined space at 35,000 feet, with 200 people breathing the same air, you do not escalate. You de-escalate. You diffuse. You never ever pull rank unless there is no other option left. So he simply said, I apologize if I caused any trouble, ma'am. That was not my intention. And he returned to his seat. But Rebecca was not finished. She followed him, down the aisle, past row 17. She stopped at his seat, leaned down, and in a voice loud enough for half the plane to hear, she said, People like you always think you know better. James froze. People like you. 3 words. Just 3 words. But in the English language, there are certain phrases that carry their full weight only when you hear them aloud, because written on a page, they look harmless, but spoken in a certain tone, with a certain emphasis on a certain word, they become something else entirely. And the way Rebecca Walsh said, people like you, with her lip curled and her eyes fixed on the color of his skin, left absolutely no question about what she meant. The young mother who had just sat down in row 15 turned around with wide eyes. A businessman across the aisle lowered his newspaper. An elderly couple near the window exchanged a look that could only be described as horrified. James set his phone down on his lap. He looked up at Rebecca, and for the first time since he had boarded the aircraft, there was something hard in his expression. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I think you should take a moment and step back." "Excuse me," I said, "you should take a moment and step back." "Are you threatening me?" "No, ma'am. I am asking you respectfully to walk away from my row before this situation becomes something neither of us wants." "Is that a threat?" "It is a request, ma'am." Rebecca's face twisted into something unrecognizable. Not anger, not even rage. Something beneath both of those. Something she had probably been carrying around inside her chest for a very long time, and now at 28,000 feet, on a delayed Tuesday flight to Seattle, it was finally bursting free. "Who do you think you are?" "I'm just a passenger, ma'am. You walk on my plane looking like that, wearing that sweater, like you don't even belong in first-class boarding, and you have the nerve to correct me in front of my own passengers. You have the nerve to tell me to step back." "Ma'am?" "No, no, you don't get to ma'am me. You don't get to talk down to me. You don't get to pretend like you're somebody important when you're clearly—" Her voice cracked. A dozen passengers were openly staring now. Several had their phones out. A woman in row 19 was filming. A man in row 20 had his camera pointed right at Rebecca's face, and Rebecca, blind with fury, saw none of it. "You people," she spat, "always think the rules don't apply to you." Something shifted in the cabin then. An audible gasp from a teenager by the window. A sharp intake of breath from the businessman across the aisle. And James Wilson, for just 1 second, closed his eyes. He was 43 years old. He had served his country on 3 continents. He had pulled wounded soldiers out of rocket fire in Iraq. He had talked a hijacker out of detonating a vest in Istanbul. He had buried friends, good men, black men, white men, Hispanic men, men who had stood beside him when it mattered, and men who had never lived long enough to come home. And now, on a civilian flight back to his wife and his 8-year-old daughter on the night before her birthday, a flight attendant he had never met before was calling him "you people." James opened his eyes, and he did what he had been trained to do. He remained calm. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and even, "I'm not going to respond to that. I'm going to sit here quietly. I'm going to ask you one last time to please return to your duties. If there is a problem, we can address it with the captain after we land." "After we land?" "Yes, ma'am." "You're going to address me with the captain after we land?" "That would be the proper procedure, yes." Rebecca laughed. It was a strange, high, hysterical laugh, the laugh of someone who had completely lost the plot. A few passengers exchanged nervous looks. The young mother, 2 rows up, was holding her baby tighter now, her husband's arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. "The proper procedure," Rebecca repeated. "Oh, that is rich. That is really rich coming from someone like you." "Ma'am." "No, no, you listen to me." And then, before James could say another word, before anyone in the cabin could react, before the laws of physics or decency or basic human civilization could intervene, Rebecca Walsh drew back her hand and slapped him. Hard. Across the face. The sound was unmistakable. A sharp, wet crack that cut through the hum of the engines and the soft murmur of the cabin. James's head snapped slightly to the side. His glasses slipped down his nose. A thin red mark bloomed across his left cheek where her wedding ring had caught him. The cabin went silent. Dead silent. Not a cough. Not a whisper. Not a single sound, except for the low whine of the aircraft's ventilation system. Every passenger within sight had frozen in place, mouths open, eyes wide. Several of them still holding their phones up, still recording their fingers, forgetting how to press stop. The young husband in row 15 had half risen from his seat, his face pale with shock. The elderly woman near the window was pressing one trembling hand to her mouth. The baby had stopped crying. James Wilson did not move. He sat perfectly still, his head still turned slightly from the impact, his eyes closed once and then open again. He reached up slowly, so slowly, and adjusted his glasses back into place on the bridge of his nose. He touched his cheek. He looked at his fingers. And then, for the first time in the entire encounter, he looked Rebecca Walsh directly in the eyes. What she saw there made her step backward, because it was not anger. It was not fury. It was not the violent retaliation she had perhaps in some dark corner of her brain been expecting, or maybe even hoping for, so that she could later claim she had been threatened by this large, dangerous black man in the wrinkled sweater. No. What she saw in James Wilson's eyes was something much worse than anger. She saw recognition. She saw a man who knew exactly what had just happened. A man who was cataloging every detail, every witness, every camera pointed in their direction. A man who was calculating right now in real time exactly which federal statutes had just been violated and what paperwork would need to be filed. She saw a professional. "Ma'am," he said quietly, and his voice was so level, so controlled, that it was somehow more terrifying than any shout could have been. "You have just assaulted me on a commercial aircraft in United States airspace." Rebecca's mouth opened, then closed. "You have also," James continued, standing up now, slow and measured, his full 6'2" frame, rising from the seat with the quiet authority of a man who had spent his life in uniform, used racially discriminatory language in front of multiple witnesses. "You have created a hostile environment in a sealed cabin at cruising altitude. And in doing so, ma'am, you have committed a federal crime." A gasp rippled through the cabin. I, Rebecca stammered. You attacked me." "Ma'am, I did not touch you. You threatened me." Every word of this conversation has been recorded by at least 4 different passengers. He turned his head slightly, and the passengers with phones as if on cue held them up higher, confirming it. Rebecca's eyes flicked from phone to phone to phone to phone. Her face went from red to white in the space of 3 seconds. "Oh God," she whispered. "Ma'am," James said, and now his voice carried through the whole cabin, clear and strong and impossible to ignore. "I am going to need you to step to the rear galley and remain there. I am going to need to speak to the senior flight attendant and the captain immediately." "Who do you think you are?" She tried again, but the words came out shaky now, uncertain, the last wild swing of a person who is already lost. And that was when James Wilson reached into his inside pocket. He pulled out a small leather billfold. He flipped it open. And inside, gleaming under the white cabin lights, was a shield, a badge, an identification card bearing the seal of the Department of Homeland Security, and 3 words that made Rebecca Walsh's legs go out from under her. Federal, Air, Marshal. Somebody in row 20 said, "Oh my God." Somebody in row 15 said, "Oh dear Lord." The businessman across the aisle had lowered his phone and was staring open-mouthed at the badge. Rebecca Walsh took 1 step backward, then another. Her hand flew up to her mouth. A strangled sound escaped her throat, something between a sob and a laugh, and her eyes darted left and right as if looking for anywhere to run. There was nowhere to run. She was on an airplane, at 30,000 feet, in front of 200 witnesses, and she had just assaulted a federal officer. "Ma'am," James said, his badge still raised, "I need you to stop talking. I need you to step to the rear galley, and I need you to understand that the moment this aircraft lands, you will be met at the gate by federal law enforcement." "Please," she whispered. "Please, I didn't know." "That doesn't matter, ma'am." "I didn't know. I didn't know." Federal law does not require that you know. It requires only that you act, and you have acted. The young mother in row 15 had begun to cry softly. Not out of fear now, but out of something else. Relief, maybe. Or vindication. Or just the simple exhaustion of a woman who had been scolded and belittled and yelled at in front of her baby, only to watch minutes later the same person who had torn her apart be brought down by her own words. James lowered the badge. He looked past Rebecca toward the front of the cabin, where the senior flight attendant, a woman in her 50s named Karen, had just emerged from the galley with a face like chalk. "Ma'am," James called out, his voice clear and authoritative. "I need to speak with the captain, now." Karen hurried forward, her hands already up in that universal gesture of de-escalation. Sir, what is happening? What?" "Federal Air Marshal," James said, flashing the badge. "I need to speak with Captain Reyes. Immediately. And I need your colleague." He nodded at Rebecca, who was now leaning against a bulkhead, hyperventilating, to be separated from the passengers and held in the rear galley until we land. Karen's eyes moved slowly from James's badge to Rebecca's tear-streaked face. Her jaw tightened. She seemed to piece together in a single long moment exactly what had just happened here. "Oh, Rebecca," she said quietly. "Oh, honey, what have you done?" Rebecca did not answer. She couldn't. Karen turned back to James. Her voice when it came was professional and clipped. "Sir, right this way. I will get the captain on the line immediately." James nodded once. He looked back down the aisle at the young mother holding her baby, at the passengers still frozen in their seats at the phones that were still quietly continuing to record. He gave the young mother the smallest nod, a silent acknowledgement, and her husband nodded back, and the mother whispered the words, "Thank you," even though James was too far away to hear them. And then James Wilson, badge in hand, walked calmly toward the cockpit. Behind him, Rebecca Walsh slid slowly down the bulkhead to the floor, her uniform askew, her hair falling out of its tight bun, and began to cry in deep, hitching, broken sobs that no one, not a single passenger, not a single crew member, made any move to comfort. Because everyone on Monarch Airlines Flight 557 understood in that moment that they were no longer watching a minor disagreement between a flight attendant and a passenger. They were watching the end of Rebecca Walsh's career, and they were watching the beginning of something much, much bigger than any of them had yet realized. The walk to the cockpit felt longer than any walk James Wilson had taken in his life. Every row he passed, every pair of eyes that lifted to meet his, every whispered conversation that fell silent the moment he came near, pressed down on him like the weight of the Atlantic itself. He kept his face neutral. He kept his breathing steady. He kept his hand away from the mark on his cheek that was beginning to throb with the slow, dull pulse of a wound he had felt 1,000 times in training, but never quite like this. Never from a civilian. Never from a woman in a uniform who should have been his partner in keeping this cabin safe. Karen, the senior flight attendant, walked half a step ahead of him, and James could see her hand trembling where it rested against the galley curtain. She was old enough to have been in the industry when 9/11 happened. She was old enough to remember a world before video phones and viral outrage. And she was old enough to understand better than Rebecca ever could what had just happened on this aircraft. "Sir?" Karen whispered as they reached the forward galley. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry." "Ma'am, I need you focused right now." "Yes, sir?" "Who else is on the crew?" "There are 4 of us. Myself, Rebecca, Michael in the back, and Jenna on the left side mid-cabin." "Where is Michael right now?" "I believe he was in the rear lavatory when it happened." "Get him forward. I want him handling the rear galley so Rebecca stays isolated. Jenna continues normal service. You and I will coordinate with the flight deck." Karen nodded quickly, her eyes wet, but her spine straightening the way a veteran's spine straightens when someone finally takes command. "Yes, sir, right away." She picked up the interphone. Her voice was clipped professional. The voice of a woman who had been waiting her entire career to be given clear instructions in the middle of a nightmare. "Michael, bring yourself forward immediately. Jenna, maintain your station and do not engage with any passenger questions. I repeat, do not engage." Then she handed the interphone to James. "Captain Reyes is on the line, sir." James took the receiver. He closed his eyes for half a second. He reminded himself that the man on the other end of this line was his colleague now. Not an adversary, not a target. A partner in a rapidly evolving federal incident. "Captain, this is Federal Air Marshal James Wilson, badge number 46297. I am declaring a Level 2 security incident on board this aircraft." There was a beat of silence. Then a voice older, steady, the kind of voice that had logged 30,000 hours in a cockpit and had heard just about everything. "Marshal Wilson, this is Captain David Reyes. Go ahead." "Captain, at approximately 8:42 local time, a member of your cabin crew, Rebecca Walsh, physically assaulted me in the main cabin. She struck me across the face with an open hand. This follows a verbal altercation during which she directed racially discriminatory language at me in the presence of approximately 200 passengers and 3 other crew members. The incident was recorded on multiple passenger devices. I am identifying myself as a federal officer, and I am now taking operational control of this cabin from a security standpoint." Another silence. Then, "Jesus Christ." "Captain, I need you to divert this aircraft to the nearest suitable airport and coordinate with ground-based federal law enforcement. I need airport police and FBI at the gate. I need Ms. Walsh to remain isolated in the rear galley under crew supervision until we land. And I need you to understand that I am recommending we do not attempt to complete the flight to Seattle." "Understood, Marshal. Stand by 1. The line went quiet. James could hear the muffled sound of the captain speaking to his first officer. He could hear the crackle of air traffic control in the background. He could feel Karen standing beside him, silent, waiting. Her eyes fixed on the carpeted floor of the galley. 30 seconds later, Captain Reyes came back on the line. Marshal Wilson, we are approximately 41 minutes from Denver International. I am initiating diversion now. I will have dispatch coordinate with airport police and the FBI field office. I will make a general announcement to the cabin that we are diverting for a quote-unquote operational issue. I will not mention the incident directly until we are on the ground. That is the correct call, Captain. Marshal, are you injured? James touched his cheek. The skin was swollen. The cut from her wedding ring was still weeping a thin line of blood. I will live, Captain. Is there any ongoing threat to the cabin? Negative. Ms. Walsh is not armed. She is not mobile. She is currently in a state of emotional collapse in the rear galley area. Do you require any additional support from the flight deck? I would ask that you remain locked and focused on flying this airplane, sir. I have the cabin. Copy that, Marshal. And Marshal? Yes, sir. Thank you for your restraint. Not every officer would have handled this the way you have. James swallowed. He did not answer for a moment. Then he said, I have a daughter waiting for me in Seattle, Captain. I would like to get these passengers on the ground safely. That's all. We will do that, Marshal. The line clicked off. James handed the interphone back to Karen. He took one long breath. And then he did what he had been trained to do, what every federal air marshal is drilled on from his first week at FLETC. He began the process of managing a post-incident cabin. He turned to Karen. I need you to make a passenger announcement. Sir, a short one. Keep it vague. Tell them that we are diverting to Denver due to a crew medical issue. Ask them to remain calm and remain seated. Do not mention the incident. Do not mention me. Yes, sir. After that, I need you to quietly collect names and seat numbers of every passenger who was filming. I want them kept in a separate list. Federal law enforcement will want to interview them on the ground and preserve their video evidence. Yes, sir. And Karen? Yes, sir. Nobody goes near Rebecca. Nobody talks to her. Nobody offers her water. Nobody offers her tissues. Nobody offers her comfort. She is, as of this moment, the subject of a federal criminal investigation. Is that understood? Karen's lips tightened. Understood, sir. Good. Michael will handle her. You stay forward with me. James stepped out of the galley and into the aisle. The cabin lights were low. The seatbelt sign had just dinged on. 200 faces turned toward him. Every one of them watching, every one of them silent. And James, for the first time in his career, had to do the thing that he hated most about being an air marshal. He had to stop pretending he was just a passenger. He cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice pitched to carry to the back of the aircraft. My name is Federal Air Marshal James Wilson. I apologize for the disruption you have just witnessed. A ripple went through the cabin. The flight crew and I are working together to resolve this matter safely. You are not in any danger. The aircraft is not in any danger. The captain has elected to divert this flight to Denver International Airport out of an abundance of caution, and we will be on the ground in approximately 40 minutes. A woman in row 11 burst into tears. Her husband wrapped an arm around her shoulder. I would ask all of you for one thing. If you were filming the incident that took place a few moments ago, please keep that video. Do not delete it. Do not post it online at this time. When we land, a senior flight attendant will come through the cabin and note your seat number, and you may be contacted by federal investigators. Your cooperation will mean a great deal. A hand went up in row 9. A young man, probably a college student. Sir, are we going to be late? James almost laughed. It was the human brain at its most beautifully absurd, reaching for the most ordinary concern in the middle of extraordinary chaos. Son, he said gently, we are going to be late, but we are going to be safe, and right now, that's what matters. The young man nodded and sank back into his seat. James turned and walked back to his row. He sat down. He took out his phone, opened the conversation with his wife, and typed, Situation on the plane. I am fine. We are diverting to Denver. I will call you the moment we land. He hit send. He put the phone face down on his lap. And then finally, James Wilson allowed himself one small moment. He closed his eyes. He pressed his fingertips against the bridge of his nose. He exhaled a breath he had been holding for what felt like an hour. And for the span of perhaps 3 seconds, just 3, he allowed himself to feel the sting of his cheek and the ache of a racial slur He had not heard directed at him in perhaps 15 years, and a tiredness that lived somewhere deeper than muscle or bone. Then he opened his eyes, and he went back to work. In the rear galley, Michael was standing at a careful distance from Rebecca Walsh, his arms folded across his chest, his expression grim. He was a younger man, maybe 30, and he had only been with Monarch Airlines for 4 years, but he had worked enough flights with Rebecca to know her moods, to know the way she treated certain passengers differently than others, to know the things other crew members had whispered about her behind closed hangar doors for years, but had never quite had the evidence to report. Rebecca was sitting on a jump seat, knees drawn up to her chest, her face buried in her hands. Her bun had come apart and strands of her hair stuck to her tear-wet cheeks. She was muttering something, over and over, the same phrase looping like a broken record. "I didn't know. I didn't know. I didn't know." Michael said nothing. "Michael," she whispered, finally lifting her face. Please tell me this isn't happening." Michael did not answer. "Please, Michael, please. You know me. You know I'm not like that. You know I was just having a bad day. You know I didn't mean it." Still, Michael said nothing. "Michael, please say something." And Michael, who had watched for 4 years as Rebecca made jokes about Muslim passengers, who had heard her mutter under her breath about Indian families in coach, who had reported her once 2 years ago for making a Hispanic mother cry, only to be told by management that Rebecca had a clean record and a very supportive family in upper corporate, finally looked at her. "I hope you go to prison, Rebecca." She jerked as if he had slapped her. "I hope the federal government throws the book at you. I hope that video goes everywhere. I hope you never put on this uniform again. I hope every passenger you ever humiliated sees your face on the news tomorrow morning and cheers." "Michael, no. No, you don't get to Michael me. You don't get to cry to me. You hit a man. You called him a slur. You did it in front of 200 people, and you did it because you thought you could. You did it because you thought nothing would happen to you. And now, something is happening to you. And you want me to feel sorry." He stepped closer. He lowered his voice to a whisper only she could hear. "4 years, Rebecca. 4 years I watched you do this to people. 4 years I watched management look the other way because your uncle is a vice president. 4 years I told myself it wasn't my place. And every one of those 4 years I was wrong. This is my place. And I should have done something a long time ago." Rebecca's face crumpled. She began to sob again. Michael stepped back. He resumed his position. He did not speak to her again. At the front of the aircraft, James Wilson was on his second phone call. This one was to the Federal Air Marshal Service Operations Center in Virginia. He had turned sideways in his seat, the phone pressed tightly to his ear, his voice low and professional. "Yes, ma'am, that is correct. Level 2 incident. The assailant is a member of the flight crew. Single victim. No weapons involved. No ongoing threat." He listened. "Yes, ma'am. The captain has initiated diversion. We will be on the ground at Denver in approximately 38 minutes. He listened again. "I have identified myself, yes, ma'am. No, ma'am, I did not retaliate. I am a black and blue, but I am intact." He listened. "Yes, ma'am, I understand. I will do that." He hung up. He sat very still for a long moment. Then he turned to look just once toward the rear of the aircraft, toward the galley curtain that separated Rebecca Walsh from the rest of the cabin. And then, because it mattered to him, he got up one more time. He walked to row 15. The young mother was rocking her baby. The father was staring at the seat back in front of him, his jaw clenched. When James approached, they both looked up, and the father moved as if to stand. "Sir, please don't get up," James said softly. He crouched in the aisle. "I just wanted to come and check on you folks." "Sir?" The young mother whispered, her eyes wet. "Are you okay? Your face." "I've had worse, ma'am. Believe me." "We are so sorry this happened to you because of us." James smiled. A small, tired, genuine smile. "Sweetheart, this did not happen because of you. This happened because a woman with a badge on her chest made a choice about me the moment I walked onto this airplane. You just happened to be sitting in the same aircraft. If it hadn't been you, it would have been someone else." The young father swallowed hard. "Mr. Wilson, sir, I am a Marine Corps veteran, 2 tours in Afghanistan." James's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Thank you for your service, brother. Sir, for what it's worth. What you did back there, the way you held it together, the way you stood up. That was the finest thing I have ever seen a man do on a plane. My wife will tell our daughter about you someday." James looked at the baby. The tiny pink face. The little closed eyes. The fist curled against her mother's shirt. "What's her name?" "Olivia." "Olivia?" James said quietly. "That's a beautiful name." He stood up. He patted the young father once on the shoulder, and he walked back to his seat without another word, because there was nothing else to say, and because his throat was tighter than he wanted to admit. At 15 minutes out from Denver, the intercom crackled again. Captain Reyes's voice came over the cabin, calm and deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are beginning our descent into Denver International Airport. We will be on the ground in approximately 15 minutes. As some of you are aware, we have an onboard situation that requires coordination with ground personnel upon arrival. I am going to ask every single passenger on this aircraft to remain in your seats when we reach the gate. Do not stand. Do not retrieve your belongings from the overhead bins. Do not approach the forward or rear galleys. Federal law enforcement will be boarding the aircraft before any passengers are deplaned. Your cooperation is critical. Thank you." A collective exhale went through the cabin, and then, from somewhere in the middle rows, a single passenger began to clap. Just one person. Then a second joined. Then a third. And within 10 seconds, the entire cabin was applauding. Not cheering. Not celebrating. Just clapping. A slow, steady, sustained applause that went on for nearly a minute, and that every passenger on the aircraft understood without anyone needing to explain it was not for the captain and not for themselves. It was for the man in row 18 with a red welt on his cheek. James Wilson did not turn around. He did not wave. He did not smile. He just lowered his head slightly, pressed a hand to his eyes, and nodded. That was all. In the rear galley, Rebecca Walsh listened to the applause through the curtain. And she understood finally, with a clarity that had been missing from her life for a very long time, exactly what she had done. Not just to James, not just to her career, but to every person she had ever dismissed, every mother she had ever snapped at, every family she had ever humiliated, every human being she had ever treated as less than. All of that had built brick by brick toward this one moment in a narrow galley at 30,000 feet, with 200 people applauding on the other side of a curtain for a man she had slapped. She pulled her knees tighter against her chest. She pressed her forehead against them. She whispered, "Oh God, oh God, oh God." Michael did not look at her. He was watching the runway lights begin to rise outside the small porthole window of the galley. He was thinking about his own daughter, about the kind of world he wanted her to walk into, and about how sometimes justice did not come in courtrooms or in protest marches. Sometimes it came at 30,000 feet on a Tuesday night from a tired black man who just wanted to get home to his little girl. The landing gear came down with a heavy, reassuring clunk. The wheels kissed the tarmac, and Monarch Airlines flight, 55792 minutes behind schedule. 1,100 miles from its destination, touched down in Denver with a suddenness that made every passenger jolt forward in their seats. The reverse thrusters roared. The brakes engaged. The aircraft slowed and slowed and slowed, and then, with a gentle turn to the left, began taxiing away from the main runway, away from the terminal, toward a remote hardstand where 3 black SUVs and 2 police cruisers were already waiting, their red and blue lights painting the asphalt in alternating colors. Inside the cabin, nobody moved. Nobody unbuckled a seatbelt. Nobody reached for a phone. The captain's voice came over the intercom one final time, quiet and grave. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now parked. Please remain seated. Federal officers will be boarding momentarily." A knock came at the forward cabin door. Sharp, professional. The kind of knock that said the people on the other side of it were not here to make small talk. Karen moved to open it, glanced at James for confirmation, and James gave her a single small nod. The door opened, and 4 men in dark jackets with bright yellow letters across their chests, 3 FBI and 1 senior DHS supervisor, stepped onto the aircraft. The lead agent, a tall woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an even sharper jaw, looked directly at James. "Marshal Wilson." "Yes, ma'am." "Special Agent Diana Chen, FBI Denver Field Office. Are you injured?" "I'll live, ma'am." "Where is the suspect?" James turned his head toward the rear of the aircraft. "Rear galley. She is in custody of crew member Michael. She has not resisted. She has not been armed at any point. She has been making verbal statements that you are going to want to hear." Agent Chen nodded once. She signaled to 2 of her agents. They moved down the aisle with the quiet, coordinated speed of people who did this every day of their lives. And as they walked past row after row of staring passengers, every one of those passengers lifting their phones now, every one of them recording Special Agent Chen, turned back to James Wilson and said in a voice that was not loud, but that somehow carried through the entire cabin, "Marshal, you did good tonight. You did real good." James did not answer her. He couldn't, because somewhere over the last 40 minutes, somewhere between the slap and the touchdown, somewhere between the badge and the applause, Federal Air Marshal James Wilson had begun very quietly to cry. The tears came silently. Two thin lines running down his cheeks over the swollen welt where her ring had split his skin and disappearing into the collar of his wrinkled gray sweater. Agent Chen saw them. She did not look away. She did not offer a tissue. She simply lowered her voice and said, "Take all the time you need, Marshal. We've got the cabin now." James nodded once. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. He straightened his spine the way every veteran learns to straighten his spine when the job is not yet done. "I'm good, ma'am. I'd like to be present for the arrest." "You sure?" "Yes, ma'am. I need to see it through." Agent Chen studied him for half a second. Then she gave him the smallest, most respectful nod a federal agent can give another federal agent. "Walk with me, Marshal." They moved down the aisle together. The two FBI agents ahead of them had already reached row 30, where the rear galley curtain still hung slightly askew. Michael was standing to the side now, his face unreadable, his hands visible at his sides, the way a professional hands you, his hands when federal officers enter a space. The lead agent, a broad-shouldered man whose jacket read FBI in bright yellow across his back, pulled the curtain gently aside. Rebecca Walsh was still on the jump seat. Her knees were still drawn up. Her face was still streaked with mascara and tears. But when she looked up and saw the 3 FBI letters on that jacket, something happened to her face that even the passengers in the closest rows could see through the curtain. Every drop of color drained out of it. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. The agent did not raise his voice. He did not draw his weapon. He did not need to. "Ma'am, Rebecca Walsh." "Yes," she whispered. "Ma'am, I'm Special Agent Robert Marshall with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I need you to stand up slowly and place your hands behind your back." "Please," she said. "Please, sir. I didn't mean it. I was having a bad day. I've had a really bad week. My fiancé and I broke up. I lost my apartment. I haven't slept in 3 days. Please." Agent Marshall did not change his expression. "Ma'am, stand up. Hands behind your back." "Please." "Ma'am, this is the second time I am asking. Do not make me ask a third." Rebecca's entire body began to shake. She placed her palms on the jump seat. She pushed herself up slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. She turned around and she placed her wrists behind her back, and the agent stepped forward, and the metal of the handcuffs clicked closed around her wrists with a sound that seemed to travel all the way down the aisle of the aircraft. A sound that was quiet. And final. "Rebecca Walsh." Agent Marshall said, his voice calm and clear. "You are under arrest for assault on a federal officer for interference with flight crew duties and for committing a hate crime as defined under United States Code Title 18 Section 249. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Do you understand these rights as I have read them to you?" Rebecca's knees buckled. Michael caught her elbow. The agent steadied her from behind. "Ma'am, I need a verbal answer. Do you understand your rights?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I understand." "Thank you, ma'am. Now please walk with me." And he turned her gently, and he walked her back down the aisle of Monarch Airlines Flight 557, past row, 30 past row, 25 past row, 20 past row, 15, where the young mother held her baby closer and watched with wide, unblinking eyes, past row 11, where the woman who had cried was now gripping her husband's hand so tightly, her knuckles had gone white past all the faces and all the phones, and all the people who would in the morning tell this story to everyone they loved for the rest of their lives. When she passed row 18, she turned her head slightly. Her eyes found James Wilson's, and she opened her mouth one more time. Perhaps to apologize. Perhaps to explain. Perhaps to beg. James did not look at her. He looked straight ahead at the seat back in front of him, and he did not turn his head by so much as a single degree. She was walked past him. She was walked through the forward galley. She was walked off the aircraft and down the stairs to the tarmac, where two uniformed airport police officers were waiting to transfer her to the back of a marked cruiser. The door slammed shut. The cruiser's lights began to turn, and Rebecca Walsh, 12-year veteran of Monarch Airlines, 41-year-old daughter of two retired schoolteachers from Connecticut, holder of a clean personnel record that had for years shielded her from consequences she should have faced long ago, was driven away from the aircraft she would never work on again. Inside the cabin, Agent Chen picked up the forward interphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Special Agent Diana Chen of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The suspect has been taken into custody. We are going to be deplaning you in small groups. When you are tapped on the shoulder, please follow the officer in front of you down the forward stairs. Bring all of your belongings. You will be taken to a private lounge inside the terminal, where we will need to briefly interview any of you who witnessed or recorded the incident. Those interviews should take no more than 30 minutes per person. We understand this is a disruption. We appreciate your cooperation, and we ask that for the moment you do not post any video of this incident to social media until our field office has had an opportunity to review and preserve the evidence." A man in row 7 raised his hand. "Ma'am, what about our connecting flights?" "Sir, Monarch Airlines has been notified. They will rebook any passengers who miss connections and provide hotel accommodations tonight at no charge. Your gate agent will have more information when you reach the terminal." Another hand, row 23, an older woman with silver hair. "Agent, is that man okay? The one she hit?" Agent Chen paused. She turned her head. She looked at James, still sitting in row 18, his hand resting on the armrest, his shoulders slightly lowered now, in a way that suggested the adrenaline was finally beginning to leave his body. "Ma'am," Agent Chen said, "Marshal Wilson is a hero." And once again the applause began. This time it was louder. This time people stood. This time the young Marine Corps veteran in row 15 rose to his feet with his baby daughter in his arms, and he said clearly for the entire cabin to hear, "Marshal Wilson, on behalf of my family, thank you, sir." And one by one, other passengers stood too. The elderly couple near the window. The businessman across the aisle. The college student who had asked about being late. The woman who had cried in row 11. They stood, and they clapped, and some of them whispered thank you, and a few of them called out louder, and James, who was no longer crying, but whose eyes were red, and whose hands were still trembling slightly against the armrest, stood up too. He turned. He faced them. He raised one hand in the smallest of waves, and then he lowered it. And he said in a voice that carried the quiet authority of a man who had spent his whole life putting others before himself, "Thank you, folks. Thank you. Let's all just get home safe tonight. That's all I want." He sat back down. The applause tapered off into soft sniffles and murmured prayers. Agent Chen gave a small nod to her team, and the deplaning began. It took almost 90 minutes to clear the aircraft. Every passenger who had filmed the incident, 31 of them in total, was escorted to a private conference room in a secure wing of the terminal. Their videos were extracted by an FBI technical specialist, time-stamped, cataloged, and preserved as federal evidence. They signed statements. They gave contact information. They were thanked for their cooperation. And then they were released one by one into a world that none of them fully understood yet had already begun to change around them. James did not leave immediately. He was taken to a separate room, a smaller one, with soft fluorescent lights, and a single table and a pitcher of ice water. A medic came in and cleaned the cut on his cheek. It took 2 butterfly bandages to close. He declined a painkiller. He sipped water. He called his wife. Denise picked up on the first ring. "Honey, oh my God. Are you all right?" "I'm all right, baby. I'm in Denver. I'm safe. I'm in a room full of federal agents. There is nothing you need to worry about." "Baby, what happened?" "A flight attendant hit me." Silence. "Then, she hit you?" "Yes." "She hit my husband?" "Yes." "That woman put her hands on you?" "Yes, baby." Denise began to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just the quiet, deep weeping of a woman who had spent 18 years married to a man who went to work every day with a badge and a gun, and who had made her peace with the idea that one day he might not come home, but who had never in all that time prepared herself for the idea that a civilian would assault him in a civilian aircraft on a civilian Tuesday flight home to his daughter. James. Yes, baby. You tell me right now, did you hit her back? No, baby. Did you raise your voice? No, baby. Did you do anything that is going to come back on you? No, baby. I did my job. You did your job. Yes, baby. I did my job. Denise exhaled a long, shaky breath. And that woman? She is in a police cruiser, baby. She has been arrested for federal hate crime charges. Another silence. Good. James almost smiled. Tell Maya I am going to miss her birthday morning, but I will be there for dinner. I promise. Honey, she has been waiting for you. I know. She made you a card. I know. Come home, James. I'm coming home, baby. He hung up the phone. He put his face in his hands. And for the second time that night, James Wilson allowed himself for maybe a full 60 seconds to just sit with the weight of what had happened. Then there was a knock at the door. Agent Chen stepped in. She had a laptop in one hand and a file folder in the other. Her face was grave. Marshal, can I sit? Please. She sat across from him. She set the laptop on the table between them. She opened the file folder, and she looked at him with eyes that were for the first time that night, slightly uncertain. Marshal, I need to tell you something, and I need you to be prepared for it. James straightened. The incident is already online. How? 2 passengers uploaded their videos before we could ask them not to. One uploaded it to Twitter 12 minutes after the slap. One uploaded it to TikTok 18 minutes after. As of right now, the Twitter video has 1.4 million views. The TikTok video has 800,000 views and is climbing by approximately 50,000 views every 10 minutes. James closed his eyes. Marshal, the incident is going viral. It is going to be the biggest story in the country by morning. Your name is not yet attached, but it will be probably within the next 6 to 8 hours. You need to be prepared for that. Understood. There is more. Go ahead. Agent Chen turned the laptop around. She pulled up a browser window. She clicked on a link. The first video has been copied and reposted by approximately 400 accounts so far. It has also been picked up by a journalist at a major cable news network who has reached out to the Bureau for comment. And there is something else you need to see. She scrolled. Marshal Rebecca Walsh has a social media history, a lot of it. And it is ugly. James opened his eyes. Show me. She scrolled through a series of screenshots. Facebook posts from 2019. Twitter likes from 2021. A public comment section on a news article about a black congresswoman in 2022. A private Instagram story reposted by a former friend of Rebecca's from earlier this year. Each one worse than the last. Racial jokes, racial slurs, complaints about minority passengers on her flights, mocking references to Black Lives Matter. A meme comparing black men to animals. A comment on a post about a police shooting in which she wrote in plain text words that James did not want to read aloud and that Agent Chen did not ask him to. Marshal. Agent Chen said quietly. This is not a woman who had one bad day. This is not a woman who snapped. This is a woman with a long and documented history of racial animus, who finally crossed a line in a place where she thought nobody important would ever notice. And internet sleuths are already digging up every one of these posts. By morning, every one of them will be on the national news. James exhaled. What about Monarch Airlines? The airline has been notified of the charges. Their legal department is aware. Their corporate communications department is in crisis mode. And I can tell you, Marshal, off the record, that Rebecca Walsh is going to be fired within the hour and that the airline is going to be making a very public statement before sunrise. What about the family? The young couple with the infant Monarchs corporate has already reached out to them. They are being offered compensation and a private jet home, though I don't know if they have accepted it yet. Good. Marshal, I need to ask you something. Go ahead. Once your name is out there, the press is going to come for you. Hard. Every network, every podcast, every social media channel. You will be asked for interviews. You will be offered money. You will be held up as a symbol of 100 different things by 100 different people with 100 different agendas. Have you thought about how you want to handle that? James was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Agent Chen, I have spent my entire life staying out of the news. I've never wanted to be a symbol. I don't want to be a hashtag. I just want to go home to my wife and my daughter. I understand that. But I also know that this isn't just about me anymore. He looked up at her. That young mother in row 15, her baby, that Marine and his family, the businessman across the aisle, the old woman who wanted to know if I was okay. Every single passenger on that plane heard what Rebecca Walsh said, and every one of them will go home tonight and tell somebody they love about it. And tomorrow, 100,000 more people will see that video, and the day after that, 1,000,000 more. And if I stay silent, then someone else, someone with an agenda will speak for me, and they will get it wrong. They will turn me into something I am not. They will turn this into something it was not. Agent Chen nodded slowly. So what are you going to do? I'm going to go home tonight. I'm going to hug my daughter. I'm going to sleep in my own bed. And tomorrow morning, I am going to sit down with one journalist. Just one. Someone I trust. And I am going to tell this story in my own words one time, and then I am never going to tell it again. Agent Chen looked at him for a long moment. Marshal Wilson, you are an extraordinary man. Ma'am, I am a tired man. Those are not mutually exclusive. He almost laughed. There was another knock at the door. A young agent poked his head in. Agent Chen, the commercial flight to Seattle is boarding in 90 minutes. Marshal Wilson is ticketed in first class. The airline is aware of the situation and has coordinated with airport security for a private pre-board. James blinked. First class? The young agent nodded. Monarch Airlines. Compliments of the CEO. Tell the CEO I don't need first class. Tell him to put the family with the baby in first class. Sir, you heard me, son? Put that young mother and her husband and their baby girl in first class. I will take whatever seat is left in coach. The young agent hesitated. Then he said, Yes, sir. I will pass that along. He closed the door. Agent Chen was smiling. Just a small smile. The kind of smile a professional gives when a professional on the other side of the table has just done something completely unprofessional and completely perfect. Marshal. Ma'am? You are going to be famous by tomorrow, whether you want to be or not. I know, ma'am. How do you feel about that? James looked down at his hands, then he looked up. Ma'am, the week I came home from my first deployment in Afghanistan, my daughter was 11 days old. She had never seen my face. My wife put her in my arms, and I held her, and she cried, and I cried, and I told her that I was going to try to be a man she would one day be proud to call her father. That promise is the reason I stayed in the Air Force. That promise is the reason I became a federal air marshal. That promise is the reason I didn't hit a woman on an airplane tonight, even though part of me, a part I'm not proud of, wanted to. He swallowed. If being famous tomorrow means my daughter gets to see her father do one thing in this world that a little black girl with her daddy's eyes can point to and say, that's my daddy right there, then yes, ma'am. I can live with being famous for a day or two. Agent Chen stood up. She extended her hand. James stood up and shook it. Marshal Wilson, it has been an honor. Likewise, Agent Chen. We will be in touch about the prosecution. Expect a subpoena for the trial. Expect to be deposed. Expect this to last 2, maybe 3 years. I expect it all, ma'am. Good. She turned to leave. At the door, she paused. Marshal, one more thing. Yes, ma'am. Rebecca Walsh is being booked right now at the federal holding facility downtown. She is going to be charged tomorrow morning. The preliminary list is assault on a federal officer, which carries up to 20 years interference with flight crew duties, which carries up to 20 more, and federal hate crime enhancement, which adds another 10. That is a maximum of 50 years in federal prison. James said nothing. She will almost certainly not get 50 years. But she is not getting probation. She is going to prison, and she is going to lose everything. Her career, her pension, her freedom, her name, all of it. I understand, ma'am. Agent Chen looked at him. Does that bring you any satisfaction, Marshal? James thought about it. He thought about the slap. He thought about the words. He thought about Rebecca Walsh's face as she sat on that jump seat in the rear galley whispering, I didn't know, over and over again, like a prayer that had come 20 years too late. He thought about his daughter, and about the birthday card waiting for him on the kitchen table. No, ma'am, he said quietly. No, it doesn't. Agent Chen nodded once. She closed the door behind her. Outside the room in a terminal that was beginning to fill with the early morning rush of Denver travelers, Monarch Airlines employees were frantically working behind closed doors. Press releases were being drafted. Lawyers were being called. Executives were being woken up. A corporate vice president, a man whose last name happened to be Walsh, was sitting in his study in Connecticut with his head in his hands, staring at a video on his iPad that he had just watched 3 times in a row. And he was whispering to no one in particular, "Oh my God, Becca. Oh my God, what have you done?" And 10,000 miles away in a small apartment in Qatar, a young Air Force airman who had once served under Staff Sergeant James Wilson in a hangar in Bagram was sitting bolt upright in his bed, staring at his phone, watching a video he could not quite believe he was seeing. And he was already typing through tears the words that would by morning be seen by 500,000 people. "That is my brother. That is my brother right there. Let me tell you about him. 0939. His name was Airman First Class Marcus Bennett, and he had been 21 years old the day Staff Sergeant James Wilson pulled him out of a burning transport plane in Bagram. Marcus was 28 now, and he was sitting in his bed in Qatar with tears running down his face, and his fingers flying across his phone screen, and the thread he was writing was growing longer by the minute. He wrote about the fire. He wrote about the smoke. He wrote about the moment he thought he was going to die. He wrote about the hand that reached through the black, choking darkness and grabbed the strap of his flight suit and dragged him 40 feet across a burning tarmac while the rounds cooked off in the fuselage behind them. He wrote about waking up in the hospital 3 days later and asking the nurse who had saved him, and the nurse saying his name was Wilson. James Wilson. Staff Sergeant, black man quiet as a church mouse, went right back to work the next day. He wrote, quote, "I am alive because of that man. I have 2 children because of that man. My wife has a husband because of that man. And tonight, a woman on an airplane spit in his face and called him a name I will not repeat and hit him, and he did not raise a hand to her, because that is the kind of man he is. That is the only kind of man he has ever been." He hit send. By 4 a.m. Eastern Time, his thread had 200,000 shares. By 5 a.m, it had 500,000. By the time James Wilson's commercial flight touched down in Seattle at 7:17 Pacific Time, Airman Marcus Bennett's thread had been seen by over 4 million people, and the national press had begun calling the United States Air Force for confirmation of Staff Sergeant Wilson's service record. James knew none of this. He was asleep. He had slept the entire flight from Denver to Seattle, his head tilted slightly against the window, his breathing slow and deep, a strip of butterfly bandage still holding his cheek together. The flight attendant, a woman in her 50s named Grace, who had been briefed by her captain before takeoff about exactly who was sitting in seat 7D, had passed his row 4 separate times during the flight, each time just to look at him, each time with something tender and fierce written in the set of her jaw. She had not let a single passenger speak to him. She had not let anyone near his seat. She had guarded him like a mother guards a sleeping child. When the wheels touched down in Seattle, she knelt beside him and touched his shoulder gently. "Marshal," she whispered. "You're home, honey. You're home." James opened his eyes. For a moment, he did not know where he was. Then he remembered. And something in his chest that had been held tight for 10 hours began very slowly to unclench. "Thank you, ma'am. You are very welcome, Marshal. Your family is waiting for you right inside the gate. Airport security has cleared you a private path. When you are ready, I will walk you off this airplane myself." James nodded. He gathered his things. He stood up. He waited for the other passengers to begin filing out. And just before he stepped into the aisle, a woman in the row behind him, a white woman in her 60s with gentle blue eyes, reached out and touched his elbow. "Son," she said softly, "I just want you to know. I have 3 grandbabies. 2 of them are brown, and tonight when I tuck them into bed, I am going to tell them about you. And I am going to tell them that when hard men speak quietly, the world should listen." James did not know what to say to that. He simply covered her hand with his and squeezed and said, "Thank you, ma'am. Thank you kindly." He walked off the plane. The jet bridge felt longer than any jet bridge he had ever walked. His legs were tired. His cheek was throbbing. His eyes were gritty from too little sleep and too much crying. And then at the end of the bridge, through the open door of the gate, he saw her. A small figure in pink pajamas, her hair in 2 pigtails, a handmade birthday card held up in both of her tiny hands, standing on a chair so she could see over the crowd, her eyes already brimming over. "Daddy?" Maya whispered, And then she screamed it. "Daddy!" She leapt off the chair. She ran. 30 feet of airport carpet in a pair of fuzzy pink slippers, and she crashed into his chest with such force that James, who had stood through a slap, who had stood through an arrest, who had stood through a press briefing and a federal interview and a cross-country flight, who had stood through all of it without so much as a knee buckling, finally went down to his knees, right there on the terminal floor. He wrapped his arms around his daughter. He pressed his face into her hair. He breathed her in, and he cried. He cried the way a man cries who has not cried in front of his daughter in 8 years. Great heaving sobs that shook his whole body. Denise was there then too, her arms around both of them whispering, "Baby, baby, baby." And Maya was holding his face in her little hands and wiping his tears with her thumbs and saying, "Daddy, why are you sad? Daddy, why are you hurt, Daddy? Who did this to you?" And James just kept shaking his head and kissing her forehead and saying, "I'm home, baby. I'm home. Daddy's home." A dozen passengers stopped walking to watch. Some of them were crying too. One man, a stranger in a business suit with a briefcase and a wedding ring, put his hand on James's shoulder without a word, gave it a single squeeze, and walked on. James and Denise and Maya left the airport through a back exit that airport security had arranged. A dark SUV was waiting for them at the curb. The driver, a retired Seattle police sergeant who had been quietly coordinated by Agent Chen, did not say a single word except to nod and hold the door. The ride home was quiet. Maya fell asleep in her mother's arms in the back seat. James reached across and held Denise's hand. She did not let go until they were in the driveway. By then it was almost 9 in the morning, and the cable news channels had already begun running the story on a loop. Federal Air Marshal assaulted by flight attendant in unprovoked racial incident. Viral video shows shocking assault on black passenger by Monarch Airlines employee. Flight attendant arrested on federal hate crime charges after mid-air altercation. James did not watch any of it. Not watch. He sat on the floor of his living room with Maya in his lap, and he opened the birthday card she had made him. It had glitter on it, and a crooked drawing of a man in an airplane uniform, and a message in purple crayon that read, "Happy birthday, Daddy, I love you the most, Maya." He read it 3 times. He put it on the fridge, and then he went into the kitchen and he made his daughter chocolate chip pancakes. And he sang her happy birthday in a slightly off-key baritone, and he did not check his phone, and he did not turn on the television. And for the first time in what felt like a very long time, Federal Air Marshal James Wilson was not a federal officer, and not a veteran, and not a hero, and not a symbol. He was just a dad, and a dad was all he wanted to be that day. By noon, the story was not just national, it was international. News vans had begun arriving at the end of his street. A reporter from Seattle's local CBS affiliate had knocked on the door 3 times. Denise had turned her away each time with a polite but firm, "The family is not speaking to the press today. Thank you. God bless. Goodbye." By 3 in the afternoon, Monarch Airlines had released a statement. The statement was professionally worded and deeply cowardly. It expressed the airline's commitment to diversity and respect for all passengers. It confirmed that the employee in question had been terminated. It offered its sincerest apologies to the affected passenger and his family. It said nothing about the vice president, whose last name was also Walsh. It said nothing about the 2 prior complaints that had been filed against Rebecca Walsh in 2022 and 2024, and that had been quietly dismissed by Monarch's HR department. It said nothing about the internal culture that had allowed a woman with a history of discriminatory behavior to work the galleys of a major American airline for 12 years. By 4 in the afternoon, an investigative journalist at a major newspaper had already broken that story wide open. Her name was Elena Rodriguez. She was 47 years old. She was a Pulitzer Prize winner. She had spent 20 years covering civil rights and corporate accountability, and she was the journalist that James Wilson had, in his conversation with Agent Chen the previous night, decided would be the one person he would speak to about what had happened. At 5 o'clock, James's phone rang. The caller ID said Elena Rodriguez. Denise looked at him from the couch where she was braiding Maya's hair for the 2nd time that afternoon. James nodded. He picked up. "Marshal Wilson, this is Elena Rodriguez." "Ma'am, Agent Chen gave me your number. She said you were willing to speak with one journalist. She said that journalist should be me. I am humbled by that recommendation. I want you to know I will treat your story with the care it deserves." "I appreciate that, ma'am." Marshal, are you able to meet in person? I can be in Seattle by tomorrow morning. I will come alone. No camera crew, just me and a recorder. We will take as long as you need. And when we are done, I will write one article and it will run in Sunday's paper, and your story will be told the way it deserves to be told. And then I will go away and leave you alone. James looked at Maya, laughing at something her mother had just whispered in her ear. Tomorrow morning works, ma'am. Come at 9. My wife will make coffee. Thank you, Marshal. Miss Rodriguez. Yes. One condition. Name it. When you write this story, I do not want it to be about me. Not really. I want it to be about every flight attendant who does their job with dignity. Every mother on a plane who has been humiliated by an employee having a bad day. Every black man, every brown man, every Asian and Arab and Indian man who has ever walked onto an aircraft and felt eyes land on him and stay on him. I want this story to be about them, not me. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Elena Rodriguez said, Marshal Wilson, I think you and I are going to get along just fine. He hung up. Denise looked up from the couch. Who is that, honey? Tomorrow's problem. She smiled. Good. Today's only problem is going to be that your daughter wants to eat her entire birthday cake before dinner. Is that right, baby girl? Yes, said Maya. It is. Well, then we better negotiate. Across the country in Denver, Rebecca Walsh was sitting in a concrete cell at the federal holding facility. She had not slept. Her mascara was dried in black streaks down her face. Her uniform had been taken from her and replaced with an orange jumpsuit. Her cell had a thin mattress and a metal toilet and no window. And she had been in it for 12 hours, and she had not stopped crying. A federal public defender named Anthony Ramirez had visited her at 9 that morning. He was a decent man. He had explained the charges to her. He had explained that her case was being pursued aggressively because of the federal hate crime enhancement. He had explained that the Department of Justice intended to make an example of her. He had explained that every single social media post she had ever made that contained a racial slur or joke had now been entered into the prosecution's evidence file. He had explained that her uncle, corporate vice president Thomas Walsh, had called her office phone that morning and left a single voicemail, which had also been recorded and preserved, and that it said, "Do not under any circumstances call me or contact me, or mention my name to anyone, you understand me. Rebecca, my career will not go down because of your mouth, do not call me." He had explained all of this to her in his calm, measured voice. And when he had finished, she had asked him one question. Am I going to prison? And Anthony Ramirez, who had been a public defender for 16 years, and who did not believe in lying to his clients, had said, Yes, Miss Walsh, you are going to prison. My job is to negotiate for as little prison as possible, but you are going to prison. I want you to begin making peace with that now. Rebecca had not spoken since. At 6 o'clock that evening, a corrections officer knocked on her cell door and told her she had another visitor. She was taken to a small concrete visitation room with a plexiglass window and a phone on each side. She sat down. She picked up the phone. And through the glass, she saw her mother. Margaret Walsh was 68 years old. She was a retired elementary school teacher. She had spent 40 years teaching fourth graders in a public school in Hartford, Connecticut. She was wearing a cardigan and a small gold cross on a chain. And she was looking at her daughter with eyes that were not angry, and not forgiving, and not tender, and not cruel. They were simply empty. Mom, Rebecca whispered. Rebecca, Mom, thank you for coming. Thank you. Thank you. I was so afraid you wouldn't. I came to say one thing to you, Rebecca. Rebecca's mouth closed. I raised you. I raised you better than this. Your father and I, we raised you in a house where we prayed every night for the same things, health and kindness, and the strength to treat other people the way you would want to be treated. Mom, I'm not finished. Rebecca's lower lip trembled. I watched the video, Rebecca. I watched the whole video. I watched my daughter, my little girl, walk down that aisle of an airplane, and I watched her stand over a black man sitting in his seat, minding his own business, and I watched her call him what she called him, and I watched her draw back her hand, and I watched her hit him. And I want you to know, that was not a stranger on that video, Rebecca. I know every one of your faces. That face you made right before you hit him. That was the face you made when you were 7 years old, and you pushed your cousin off the swing set because he got the tire swing first. That face. I know that face. And I have been telling you your entire life to stop making that face. And you did not listen to me. Rebecca was crying now, silently, big fat tears running down her cheeks behind the plexiglass. Rebecca, I love you. I will always love you. You are my daughter. But I am an old woman, and I am going to be honest with you, because I do not have the time left in this life to be anything else. What you did last night was not the sin of a single moment. What you did last night was the sin of a lifetime of small sins that you let harden into who you are. And I knew. And your father knew. And we did not love you hard enough to make you stop. And that is on us too, Rebecca. That is a guilt your father and I will carry to our graves. Mommy, please. Rebecca, listen to me. Yes, Mommy. You are going to go to prison. You are going to sit in a small room for a long time, and you are going to think about who you have been. And when you come out, you are going to have a choice. You can come out bitter. You can come out blaming him, blaming me, blaming the world, blaming everyone who did not stop you. Or you can come out changed. You can come out new. You can come out the woman God meant you to be, the one I tried to raise and failed to raise. Margaret Walsh leaned forward. She pressed her hand against the plexiglass. Promise me, Rebecca. Promise me right now through this glass that when you come out of this place, you will come out new. Not the Rebecca who walked on that airplane, a different Rebecca. Promise me that. Because if you cannot promise me that, then I am burying my daughter right now while she is still breathing, and I cannot do that. I cannot do that. Rebecca pressed her hand against the glass opposite her mother's. Mommy, promise me, child. I promise. Say it like you mean it. I promise, Mommy. I promise. Margaret Walsh nodded once, slowly. And then she did something that Rebecca had not seen her mother do since her father's funeral 11 years ago. She bowed her head, she closed her eyes, and she began to pray. Dear Lord, I come to you a sinner. I come to you the mother of a sinner. I come to you tonight asking for mercy on my child. Not escape from her sin, not rescue from her consequence. Mercy. The mercy to change. The mercy to become. The mercy to be made new. And Lord, I come to you also asking mercy for the man she wronged, for the Marshal, for his family, for his little girl. Lord, I am not worthy to pray for him, but I am praying for him anyway. Lord, let him be healed. Let him be whole. Let him know that there is a woman in Connecticut tonight who cannot sleep because your servant did a terrible thing to your servant, and your servant is ashamed, and your servant is sorry. Amen. Rebecca whispered, Amen. Margaret opened her eyes. I love you, Rebecca. I love you, Mommy. Goodbye, my child. Goodbye, Mommy. And Margaret Walsh stood up and she walked out of the visitation room, and she did not look back, because if she had looked back, she would not have been able to walk out at all. And Rebecca sat alone in the visitation booth for a long time after she was gone, holding the disconnected phone in her hand, staring at the plexiglass. Back in Seattle, James Wilson was tucking his daughter into bed. Maya had already fallen asleep with a piece of birthday cake still on her chin. He wiped it off with his thumb. He kissed her forehead. He pulled the blanket up to her chin. And he stood in the doorway of her room for a long time, just watching her breathe, just watching the tiny rise and fall of her chest, just listening to the soft sound of the only thing on this earth that mattered to him more than his own life. Denise came up behind him. She slipped her arm around his waist. She rested her head against his shoulder. She's out like a light, Denise whispered. Yeah. How are you, baby? James was quiet for a long time. Denise. Yes, baby. I am tired. I know you are. But I am home. Yes, baby, you are home. He turned to her. He cupped her face in his hands. He kissed her forehead. He kissed her cheeks. He kissed her mouth. And then he held her against his chest right there in the hallway outside his daughter's bedroom. And he let out a long, slow breath that he had been holding in one way or another since the very moment Rebecca Walsh's palm had met his cheek. Tomorrow, Elena Rodriguez would arrive at 9. Tomorrow, the country would still be talking about him. Tomorrow, the legal process would grind forward slow and inexorable, like a freight train, carrying Rebecca Walsh toward a destination she could not yet see. But tonight, in a quiet house in Seattle, a federal air marshal held his wife in his arms, and a little girl in pink pajamas slept soundly in the next room, and a chocolate birthday cake sat half-eaten on the kitchen counter. And that for James Wilson was enough. Elena Rodriguez arrived at 9 o'clock the next morning exactly as promised. She was alone. She carried a small leather notebook, a digital recorder, and a paper bag of fresh croissants from a bakery she had stopped at on her way in from the airport. Denise greeted her at the door with the wary warmth of a woman who had seen 100 reporters knock on that same door in the last 20 hours and had turned every single one of them away. "You must be Mrs. Wilson, and you must be the one my husband trusts." "I hope to be, ma'am." Denise looked at her for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. "Come in, he's in the kitchen." Elena walked in quietly. She took in the small living room, the family photos on the wall, the half-eaten birthday cake still sitting on the kitchen counter, the crooked drawing of a man in a pilot's uniform taped to the fridge. She said nothing about any of it. She set the croissants on the counter. She sat down across from James Wilson at the small wooden kitchen table, and she did not turn on her recorder right away. She just looked at him. "Marshal Wilson." "Miss Rodriguez, before we begin, I want to tell you something. I am the granddaughter of a Mexican woman who cleaned houses in El Paso for 40 years. She was spoken to her whole life the way that woman spoke to you on that airplane. She died before I could win any awards. I became a journalist because I could not fix what was done to her. But I promised myself the day I buried her that I would spend my career making sure that what was done to her was not done in silence to anyone else if I could help it. I am here today to keep that promise, not for a headline, not for clicks, for her." James looked at her, then he nodded once. "Turn on your recorder, ma'am. Let's go to work." They talked for 4 hours. Denise brought coffee. She brought more coffee. She brought sandwiches at lunch. And James Wilson, who had spent his entire adult life keeping his story close to his chest, told Elena Rodriguez everything. About his childhood in South Chicago. About his father, a bus driver who had worked the same route for 31 years. About his mother, a school nurse who had pulled bullets out of more black teenagers in her clinic than she ever should have had to. About joining the Air Force at 18. About the deployments. About Marcus Bennett and the burning transport plane. About the day his daughter was born while he was 9,000 miles away. About the decision to leave active duty and become an air marshal. About every flight, every quiet flight, every uneventful flight, every flight on which he had done his job and gone home and kissed his wife and never told her a single story about what he had seen. And then he told her about Flight 557. He told her about Rebecca Walsh's face when he boarded. He told her about the young mother and the diaper bag. He told her about the slap. He told her about the words. He told her about the decision in that one critical second to not strike back. About the trained response that took over when the human response wanted to howl. About pulling the badge. About walking to the cockpit. About the applause. Elena did not interrupt him once. She did not ask a single leading question. She simply let him talk, and she wrote in her notebook, and from time to time she nodded, and from time to time she wiped her own eyes, and she did not apologize for any of it. When he was finished, she asked him one final question. "Marshal Wilson, what do you want Americans to take away from your story?" James was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Ma'am, I want them to know that what happened to me on that airplane did not begin on that airplane. It began a long time before. It began every time Rebecca Walsh made a joke that nobody pushed back on. It began every time a coworker heard her say something ugly and decided not to report it. It began every time a supervisor saw a complaint on her desk and decided it wasn't worth the paperwork. It began every time a corporate office got a phone call from a vice president named Walsh and decided to make that phone call go away. It began every time. And it ended on an airplane in front of 200 witnesses at 30,000 feet, because there was nowhere else for it to go. It had to come out somewhere, and this time it came out against a man who happened to be wearing a badge under his sweater. But 1,000 other times, it has come out against people who were not wearing badges. Against mothers, against children, against old men and young women who had no video to protect them and no federal statute to lean on. Those are the people I want America to think about. Not me. Them. Elena Rodriguez stopped writing. She looked up. She said very quietly, "Marshal, thank you." She turned off the recorder. She closed her notebook. She stood up. And she shook his hand, and she shook his wife's hand, and she went out the door, and she flew back to New York that afternoon. And she wrote through the night, and her story ran in the Sunday morning edition of one of the most widely read newspapers in the United States of America, under the headline, "The Slap Heard Round the Country and What It Should Teach Us All." The article was 11,000 words long. It won her a second Pulitzer Prize 18 months later, but James Wilson did not read it until 3 weeks after it was published, because James Wilson for the next 21 days had exactly one priority in the world, and that priority was not the newspaper and not the television, and not the interview requests that were coming in by the dozens every single hour. His priority was a little girl named Maya, who had just turned 8 years old, and who had asked her father on the morning of her birthday if he would please teach her how to ride her bicycle without training wheels. He taught her in the cul-de-sac at the end of their street. It took 7 days. She fell 4 times. She scraped her knee once. She cried exactly once, and that was when her father told her on the morning of the 7th day that he thought she was ready. And when she wobbled down the driveway on 2 wheels without him holding the seat, she turned her head, and she looked back, and she saw him standing there with his hands in his pockets and tears running down his face, and she shouted, "Daddy, look, I'm doing it, I'm doing it." And James Wilson, who had survived combat and assault and public humiliation and a slap from a woman who hated him on sight, finally sat down on the curb of his own driveway in suburban Seattle and wept like a boy. Because that was the moment. That was the one. That was the thing he had come home for. The trial of Rebecca Walsh began 8 months later in a federal courtroom in Denver on a gray morning in early October. James Wilson flew in the night before. He sat in the front row of the gallery in a simple dark suit. Denise sat beside him. Maya was not there. Maya was at home with her grandmother because James and Denise had agreed long before the trial date that their daughter did not need to sit in a courtroom and hear the word that Rebecca Walsh had used against her father. The trial lasted 11 days. The prosecution called 23 witnesses. 18 of them were passengers from Monarch Airlines Flight 557. The young Marine veteran, whose name turned out to be Corporal Daniel Medrano, testified on the 4th day. His wife testified on the 5th. Their baby girl Olivia, who was now almost 2 years old, did not testify, but a photograph of her was entered into evidence and shown to the jury. The businessmen across the aisle testified on the 6th day. The elderly woman near the window testified on the 7th. Karen, the senior flight attendant, testified on the 8th. Michael, the junior flight attendant, testified on the 9th. And Michael on the stand did something that no one, not even the prosecution, had fully expected him to do. He broke the dam. He testified about the 2022 complaint which he had filed himself and which had been dismissed. He testified about the 2024 complaint filed by a Hispanic mother of 3, which had been settled out of court with a non-disclosure agreement. He testified about the jokes Rebecca had made in the crew lounge. He testified about the passengers she had humiliated. He testified about the muttered slurs he had heard her use in the galley when she thought nobody was listening. And when the defense attorney asked him on cross-examination why he had not come forward sooner, Michael Vasquez looked directly at Rebecca Walsh across the courtroom, and he said, "Because I was a coward, and because Monarch Airlines wanted me to be a coward, and I am not going to be a coward anymore." The gallery erupted. The judge called for order. The defense attorney sat down. Rebecca did not look at him. She sat at the defense table in a gray suit, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face thin and pale. She had lost 25 pounds in the 8 months since her arrest. She had not slept through a single night. Her mother sat in the second row of the gallery every single day of the trial, and every single day of the trial she did not speak to her daughter, did not make eye contact with her, did not acknowledge her presence, but she also did not miss one single day. On the 10th day, the prosecution rested. On the 11th day, the defense called one witness. That witness was Rebecca Walsh herself. She was on the stand for 6 hours. Her attorney, Anthony Ramirez, had advised her against testifying. He had told her in no uncertain terms that putting her on the stand was giving the prosecution a free shot at an open goal. He had told her that the jury would not be sympathetic. He had told her that her history of social media posts would be used to destroy her on cross-examination. She had listened to all of it, and she had said, "Anthony, I am not going up there to save myself. I am going up there because there is a man in the front row of that courtroom to whom I owe something that I cannot put in a written statement. And I am going to give it to him from the witness stand on my feet in front of God and everyone, or I am not going to sleep for the rest of my natural life." Anthony Ramirez had looked at her for a long time, And then he had said, "Then say what you need to say, Rebecca, and God help you." She sat on the stand. She was sworn in. The prosecutor's question was simple. "Miss Walsh, do you admit that on the night of the incident you struck Marshal Wilson across the face?" "Yes." "Do you admit that you used the language that has been testified to by multiple witnesses?" "Yes." "Do you admit that you did so in the presence of approximately 200 passengers and that you did so without provocation from Marshal Wilson?" "Yes." "Miss Walsh, is there anything else you would like the jury to know?" Rebecca turned. She did not look at the jury. She did not look at the judge. She did not look at her attorney. She looked directly at James Wilson. "Marshal Wilson." The courtroom went still. "I am not asking for forgiveness. I am not entitled to it. I am not asking for leniency. I am not entitled to that either. I am going to prison. I know that. I am ready for that. What I am doing on this stand right now, Marshal, is this. I am looking at you. I am looking you in the eye. And I am telling you in front of every person in this room and in front of God above that what I did to you was evil. It was evil, Marshal. There is no other word for it, and I cannot undo it. I have tried every night for the last 8 months to undo it in my head, and it cannot be undone. But I can tell you that I am sorry. I know those words are not enough. I know they will not heal the place on your face that I cut, or the place in your soul that I cut, or the place in your daughter's memory, where you had to tell her what Daddy looked like when he got home. I know that, but I am going to say them anyway, because my mother raised me better than I have lived, and she told me in a prison visitation booth 8 months ago that if I came out of this place the same woman I went in, as I would be dead to her. And Marshal, I do not want to be dead to my mother. I want to be alive. I want to be the woman she tried to raise. And the only way I know how to start becoming that woman is to stand on this witness stand today and say to you, Marshal James Wilson, I am sorry. I was wrong. You did nothing to deserve what I did to you, and I will spend whatever years I have left on this earth trying to prove that I understood that. Thank you, Marshal. Thank you for not hitting me back. Thank you for being a better person at 30,000 feet than I have been at any altitude of my entire life. She stopped. The courtroom was silent. The prosecutor had no further questions. The judge, a 60-year-old black woman named Judge Patricia Thompson, did not speak for almost 30 seconds. And when she did, her voice was careful. Miss Walsh, you may step down. Rebecca stepped down. She walked back to the defense table. She sat down. She did not cry. She simply folded her hands in her lap. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. They came back with a verdict of guilty on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. When the verdict was read, James Wilson did not stand. He did not cheer. He did not smile. He simply nodded once very slowly, and he reached over, and he took his wife's hand, and he held it tightly, and he closed his eyes. Denise leaned against his shoulder and wept silently for everything that had been lost, and everything that could never be gotten back. At the sentencing hearing, Rebecca Walsh was given a sentence of 9 years in federal prison. Her attorney had argued for 5. The prosecution had asked for 15. Judge Thompson had split the difference, and in her sentencing remarks, she said something that would be quoted in law school textbooks for the next 20 years. Miss Walsh, I have listened carefully to every word of testimony in this trial. I have read every statement you have submitted. I have watched the video. I have watched it many times. And I want to tell you what I believe. I believe that the woman I am sentencing today is not the same woman who walked onto that airplane 2 years ago. I believe that. I believe people can change. I am an old woman, and I have been on this bench for a long time, and I have seen it happen. But I also believe that consequences must follow actions. I believe that the law does not exist to punish. The law exists to protect. And the law must protect every American citizen, regardless of the color of their skin, from being assaulted and dehumanized in public places by people in positions of authority. If I gave you 5 years as your attorney, as requested, I would be telling every flight attendant in America, every police officer, every federal employee, every person who puts on a uniform that they can say these words and perform these acts and walk away in 5 years. I will not do that. If I gave you 15 years, I would be telling you that I did not believe you when you stood on that witness stand and apologized. I do believe you. I believe you are sorry. I believe you are changed. So I am giving you 9. That is the longest you can serve while still being young enough at your release to build a different life. That is the shortest you can serve while still honoring the gravity of what you did to Marshal Wilson. 9 years. I wish you peace, Miss Walsh. Go with God. Rebecca Walsh was taken away in handcuffs. Her mother stood up in the gallery. She walked to the railing. And for the first time in 8 months and 2 weeks, Margaret Walsh looked at her daughter as the marshals led her out of the courtroom. She nodded. Just once. A small single nod. And Rebecca, through her tears, nodded back. James Wilson walked out of the courthouse with his wife on his arm. A crowd of reporters and supporters and strangers had gathered on the steps. Someone shouted his name. Someone asked for a comment. Someone else held up a sign that read, "Thank you, Marshal Wilson." A middle-aged black woman with tears in her eyes reached out and touched his sleeve and said, "My son is going to hear about you tonight, sir." And James thanked her. And he kept walking. And he and Denise got into the waiting car, and they drove to the airport, and they flew home to Seattle, to the small house at the end of the cul-de-sac, to the little girl on the pink bicycle, to the half-eaten birthday cake that had long since been thrown away and replaced by a dozen others. Maya met them at the door. She was 9 years old now. She wrapped her arms around her father's waist. "Daddy, is it over?" James knelt down. He cupped his daughter's face in his hands. He kissed her forehead. "Baby girl, it is over." "Did the bad lady go to jail?" "Yes, baby, she did." "Are you sad, Daddy?" "No, baby, I am not sad." "Are you happy?" James looked up at his wife. Denise was standing in the doorway, her eyes wet, her mouth soft. He looked back at his daughter. He pulled her into his arms. He held her against his chest. And he closed his eyes, and he breathed her in, and he said the only thing that a father can ever truly say at a moment like this one. "Baby girl, I am home. And your daddy is here. And he is never going anywhere again." 5 years later, on a Tuesday afternoon in spring, a woman in her late 40s walked out of the Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin, California. She wore plain street clothes. She carried a small canvas bag. Her hair had gone gray at the temples. Her mother was waiting for her in the parking lot in an old blue sedan. Rebecca Walsh had served 5 years of her 9-year sentence and had been released on good behavior. She had completed her GED teaching certification inside the prison. She had tutored other inmates. She had written a letter to James Wilson on every single anniversary of the incident. 5 letters in total, and she had never once asked him to respond, and he never had, and she had not expected him to. She got into her mother's car. Her mother did not speak. She simply reached across and squeezed her daughter's hand, and they drove away. In Seattle on that same Tuesday afternoon, James Wilson was sitting on a folding chair at a middle school graduation ceremony. His daughter Maya, now 13 years old, was graduating 8th grade and giving the valedictorian speech. Denise was beside him with her camera. The gymnasium was full of families. The principal called Maya's name. She walked to the podium. She opened her speech. And what she said in front of 400 people was this: "My daddy is a federal air marshal. When I was 8 years old, a person hurt him, badly. And when he came home, he did not teach me to hate the person who hurt him. He taught me to ride a bike. Every day this year when I have wanted to give up on something hard, I have thought about my dad on the day he came home from that flight. He did not give up. He did not become angry. He taught his little girl how to pedal forward. That is what my dad has taught me. Forward. Always forward. Thank you." The gymnasium erupted. James Wilson sat in his folding chair with his hand over his mouth. And he did not try even for a moment to stop the tears from coming. He let them come. All of them. For every mile he had flown. For every flight he had walked down. For every slap he had not returned. For every word he had not repeated. For the daughter who had grown up anyway, strong and kind and full of light in a world that had done its very worst to her father and had still in the end failed to touch her. Because some men are given the chance to show the world who they are. And some men, if they are very lucky, are given the chance to show their daughters. And James Wilson, Federal Air Marshal, United States Air Force veteran husband, father, quiet man, had been given both, and he had not wasted either one. That is the end of the story.